Hello, hello. Very well. Nice to see people from around the world connecting. So, welcome. My name is Patrizia Cocca. I am the communication and knowledge management lead for the Global Evaluation Initiative. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the webinar. This is one of the webinars that we regularly host within the GEI network. And today we have been partnering with Clear Lab in Brazil to bring you this amazing panel and discuss about climate actions and gender consequences and impact on gender. Before we move on, I just wanted to also remind you that we do have interpretation today. The interpretation is done with an AI-based solution. So there will be a little bit of delay between what the panelists say and what you will hear. But we really would like to welcome your comments and let us know how clear is the translation. So if you can follow either in Spanish or Portuguese, at the end of the session, please let us know how clear was the interpretation for you and if you had any problem at all. Put your questions in the chat, your comments in the chat. And one final advertisement before I leave to Katie. I'd like to remind everybody that in about a month, we will start the Global Evaluation Week, which is the knowledge fair of the GEI. This year, the theme is Evaluation for a Better Future, Environmental Sustainability, Inclusion, and Peace. We already received about 400 events application, so there will be a lot of events to choose from all over the world. Great. I love Global too, Yakuta. We are very excited. We will start on May 27 with a global launch that will be followed the same week with regional launches. And then the actual global week will take place between June 2nd and June 6th. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you there. And I'll pass now the microphone to Ketevan Nozadze. Katie is a colleague here at the GEI. And Katie, I leave the floor to you to present yourself and present the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrizia. I'm happy to open this interesting webinar. My name is Ketevan Nozadze. I lead climate and country programs here at Global Evaluation Initiative. At GEI, we're committed to promoting the use of gender approaches in evaluation practice and enhancing climate evaluations. We work closely with our partners to strengthen evaluation capacities and support national evaluation systems to become more gender and climate responsive. In partnerships with Global Affairs Canada and Climate Funds, we support evaluators, researchers, climate observers to apply feminist evaluation practices and conduct country-led climate finance evaluations. Our objective is to strengthen gender-responsive climate action and learn from current practices. Today, we're honored to host this webinar and learn from our partners about their evaluative work across these two critical agendas. With that, I'm happy to host everybody here and give a floor to the moderator to guide us through this interesting webinar. Amanda, over to you.
Thank you, Katie. So once again, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here. This webinar focuses on the integration of gender perspectives in climate action, which is a key element for us to ensure more equitable and also effective responses to the climate crisis. So today we will hear from two major climate funds, CIF and GEF, on how are they incorporating gender considerations into their work, how do they monitor and evaluate these aspects, and also what challenges have they faced and what lessons they have learned so far. We Evaluation in Burkina Faso, focused on. So our main goal here is to reflect on how gender-responsive monitoring and evaluation can help us improve future climate policies and also investments. We'll now begin with the presentations. Each speaker will have 7 minutes, and we will have Catherine Steingraber for the first presenter. So Kate is from the GEF's Independent Evaluation Office, where her evaluation work focuses on policies, community engagement, and social inclusion. She brings extensive experience from the World Bank, as well as from the Asian Development Bank and the Climate and Land Use Alliance. Her background is in natural resource management, with a strong focus and interest in participatory in development. So please, Kate, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you to GEI and CLEAR for the invite. Greetings to everybody. I'm looking forward to sharing our work with you and also to learning from my co-panelists and all of the participants. So as mentioned, my name is Kate Steingraber. I'm an evaluation officer at the GEF Independent Evaluation Office, and I'm going to talk to you about the monitoring and evaluation of gender-sensitive actions in the GEF. And so I work in the GEF IEO. We do independent evaluations, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about the work that the GEF Secretariat does to sort of understand, because there's differential responsibilities in terms of monitoring and evaluation. Next slide, please. So in the GEF, I've highlighted 3 different areas to sort of understand how the GEF focuses on gender. There is a gender equality policy, and there's also accompanying guidance that was updated in 2017. This sets forth the requirements for the GEF agencies to demonstrate capacity to address gender in all of their projects. And it also sets out project requirements, a gender analysis, a gender action plan linked to the issues. Oh yeah, sorry, Patricia. GEF is the Global Environment Facility. The gender action plan linked to the discrepancies or challenges identified in the gender analysis, and then indicators, either sex disaggregated or gender responsive. So all projects need to have these elements per this policy. The GEF also has a gender partnership, which is a technical working group that does knowledge sharing and provides inputs into strategy and programming. And then they also have dedicated staff that work on gender. Next slide, please. And so in terms of the monitoring part of the monitoring and evaluation sort of pairing, I wanted to share a little bit about, this is the responsibility of the GEF Secretariat. So they provide monitoring on the implementation of their policy. So this is not in the remit of our office, but it's an important data source for us when we conduct our evaluations. So twice a year during our council meetings, the GEF presents a corporate scorecard that has 2 indicators related to gender. I'll explore them a bit later on the next slide. They also have annual progress reports once a year, where they provide qualitative data, progress on integrating gender considerations in project design, and then recently they've started integrating lessons learned during implementation. And then also the GEF has a system of gender tagging, where the agencies that design the projects self-tag the projects. There's a gender responsive tag, but then there's also 3 separate tags that address the issues that the GEF has identified in terms of important mechanisms to address gender disparities. So the projects self-tag, identifying if they close gender gaps in access to and control over resources, whether they improve women's participation in decision-making, and also whether they contribute to social and economic benefits or services for women. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the reporting that's done in the corporate scorecard on gender equality. These are the 2 indicators. This is a replication of the last reporting. So you can see that as of the last council meeting, the GEF Secretariat reported that all of their project concepts considered gender issues at the initial project design, and that 50% of anticipated beneficiaries are female and male. The important thing to note here is that this is a quality at entry assessment, and these are anticipated, not actual beneficiaries. And we'll talk a little bit about how we're assessing projects that consider gender issues and the level of depth at which gender is treated as an issue in projects when we move on to the evaluation section. Next slide, please. So moving on, so that was the overview of the way that the GEF Secretariat looks at gender, works on gender, and also monitors gender. Now we're shifting to the role of the GEF Independent Evaluation Office, where I work, where we conduct independent thematical and topical evaluations. Just to clarify, our office does not conduct the project level evaluations. That is the responsibility of the implementing agencies. So we really do sort of more cross-cutting or thematic evaluations. So the ways that we consider gender in our portfolio are multiple. Every 4 years, we go through a replenishment process, and we every 4 years, there's at least a standalone evaluation on gender or an evaluation that covers gender as a main topic. We also consider gender as a cross-cutting issue in many of our thematic evaluations. We collaborate with the GEF Gender Partnership. They're an important information source for us, and we also validate our findings with them. We include them in our reference groups. And we are responsible for writing terminal evaluation guidelines. These are the guidelines that the GEF agencies use when they write their final evaluations of projects. And we have included requirements in these guidelines that the GEF agency evaluation offices must report on all of the gender actions, basically along the lines of what the policy requires. So to what extent did the project follow the policy requirements, and then what were the impacts related to gender? Also challenges and lessons learned. And so, the last point I just wanted to make is that we're sort of shifting more towards building a body of evidence on the impact of the gender-sensitive climate actions. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. And use and influence is going to be one of the discussion questions, so I'll hold off on that. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of the evaluations, those evaluations that I mentioned that sort of have standalone coverage of gender. In 2017, we did an evaluation of gender mainstreaming in the GEF, and that actually served to provide a recommendation on updating the gender policy, which led to the current policy. In 2021, we conducted an evaluation of institutional policies and engagement, which looked at the gender policy alongside our stakeholder engagement and safeguards policies, and really sort of made a recommendation that we create an overarching narrative for policy coherence. And so the conversation at the GEF is starting to shift towards social inclusion in addition to gender. And then current evaluation that I'm leading is the evaluation of inclusion of historically marginalized groups with special attention to fragile and conflict-affected situations. And here, as I mentioned, we're moving beyond looking at compliance, and we're looking at quality of implementation of the gender policy. So what do those gender analyses look like? How are the gender action plans? Do they actually reflect the gender analysis? And then what is the quality of the indicators that are being used in the projects? And then we're also assessing the links between inclusion that we're measuring at the project level and project outcomes to really build that evidence base. Next slide, please. And finally, I just wanted to give some examples of how our evaluations do cross-cutting coverage of gender. I won't go into super detail here, but just there's 3 examples of recent evaluations. And what's interesting to me and validating is that the findings are relatively consistent across evaluations. And so what we're seeing is, and again, you have to keep in mind that we sometimes look at historical cohorts of projects. So where the GEF is reporting 100% compliance, we might see a little bit of a lag because we're looking at older projects. But we do see improvement over time in terms of looking at the compliance with the policy. We also see some benefits for women's participation, but challenges for GEF projects in overcoming the deeply entrenched or systemic gender issues. And then the last project example or the evaluation is from the annual evaluation report of a different fund, but it's very relevant. We find that gender responsive approaches are a key determinant of project success. So this is another example of how we're trying to move beyond compliance and assess the actual impact of these gender policies on outcomes in environmental projects. Last slide. This is just where you can find our evaluations and some examples of evaluations that have covered gender as a cross-cutting issue. Thank you. Back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Kate. Let's move now to our next speaker, which is Farah Outeldait. Farah is a social development specialist in the CIF Gender and Social Inclusion team, focusing on advancing social dimensions of climate change within climate strategy, operations, and analytical work. She has over a decade of international expertise in gender equality and social inclusion analysis, program management, and multi-stakeholder collaborations. So over to you, Farah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. So good evening, morning, afternoon, everyone. It's good to see people from all over the world. And as you could tell from the introduction, I am not a monitoring, reporting, or evaluation specialist, but we work closely, the gender team, with the cross-cutting team on monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. So I'll be sharing my perspective from the gender side. And next slide, please. So I'll just be first providing a very, very brief introduction on who we are, because I see a lot of people online and they might not all be familiar with the climate investment funds. So first, what is the CIF? It's one of the largest multilateral climate funds and the largest source of concessional financing to the MDB, so the multilateral development banks. We work with 6 MDBs. And we provide concessional competitive financing to reduce risk for investors and also attract additional capital from other development actors, but also the private sector. And so we operate in several areas of climate finance, forestry, energy transition, energy access, climate resilience, and the gender team, social inclusion and gender team, works with the program teams across all of those areas. Next slide, please. So our business model relies on a country-led programmatic approach, which goes beyond individual projects to design coherent intervention packages at the country level. So the investment planning and the design is led by the countries, with participation from various stakeholders. And we at CIF, we act as a convening platform, bringing together multilateral development banks, but also the private sectors, government, civil society, observers. I know Hinan, who will be speaking after me, is one of them. And so social inclusion and gender considerations are really part of the DNA of CIF. And it should be, and it is included in the outset, in the design of the overall programs, but also we're making sure that it is included in the implementation of individual projects. And so we have requirements on gender inclusion during the investment plan process. And in our results framework, disaggregation, gender disaggregation is required for some of our core indicators that are mandatory for reporting. And all programs also have co-benefit indicators that target activities towards vulnerable groups, but those are not mandatory for reporting. But I'll discuss this a bit later. And so the role of the gender team, of our team, is to monitor the quality of gender integration at entry, so at project approval. And we also provide upstream support to MDBs and to countries on demand and if needed during the investment plan preparation. Next slide, please. So in 2018, CIF adopted a gender policy, which builds on the MDB's own gender strategies and their own policies. And it requires gender integration in investment plans, but also in the projects and in internal CIF functions. So we set in the policy targets for gender representation in CIF governance, for staffing, also in terms of budgeting. And we've developed since 2014 3 gender action plans. And the most recent one that was developed in 2020 focused explicitly on formal and informal institutions and markets, with really the objective to shift the focus from individual actions towards more systemic level actions. And so last year, we started a learning review to assess the impact of CIF's investment in promoting gender equality across our portfolio. So this is an ongoing process. So unfortunately, I do not have findings to share today. So now maybe I'll say a brief word on our role at the CIF Secretariat as the gender team. So of course, it is to promote gender responsive approaches and programming within the CIF. And we do so through monitoring and learning, technical support, as I said, but also through knowledge generation. And we also provide guidance to countries and project teams to ensure that there is a robust gender integration in investment plans and projects. And for that, we've developed a few years ago a guidance note highlighting some of the good practices for gender integration in project design. And it lays out 3 very simple, basic steps for effective gender integration. So first, conducting a gender analysis that is specific to the sector that is targeted by the project. And so the aim of this analysis is to identify gaps in opportunities, but also in outcomes that are relevant to the project objectives. Second, planning specific actions to address those gaps. And third, defining how progress on those actions and their impact will be measured. And for that, we're very much encouraging teams to use gender-specific indicators in addition to gender disaggregated indicators that will specifically track gender-related outcomes at the project level. Next slide, please, and it's my last one. So the CIF uses, very similar to what Kate presented for the GEF, we use a gender scorecard indicators to monitor the performance of our projects at entry and of investment plan as well. So we're doing this at the design phase. And so the scorecard includes indicators to assess the inclusion in the design of the project of sector-specific gender analysis, of the inclusion of gender actions that are included in core project activities, but we're also looking at women-specific activities to address and narrow the gaps that are identified in the analysis. And then gender indicators that measure progress on gender actions and sex disaggregated core indicators. So what we have here on this slide is the gender scorecard results under ongoing programs. And so what we observe is that over 60% of projects met all 3 criteria. So that means that they have included gender analysis, gender activities, and gender indicators. And we're seeing a notable increase in gender mainstreaming over time, which is also, of course, not all credit is due to CIF. I mean, it's also because the MDBs have significantly enhanced their policies on gender and social inclusion over the past decade. I think I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Farah. Let's move on to our final speaker, which is Aicha Diallo. Aicha is a project coordinator at the Team Hinan Association, a Sahel-based organization promoting women's well-being in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. She's a former observer representing indigenous peoples and local communities within the CIF, and currently she coordinates a joint evaluation with JVE Senegal on women's access to climate finance in Burkina Faso, comparing two CIF-supported projects. Aicha is committed to advancing gender equality and strengthening women's leadership in climate action across the Sahel. So over to you, Aicha.
Thank you for the introduction. Can you all hear me? Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I'm really glad to be part of this conversation on gender-sensitive climate action. Thanks to the previous panelists for the thoughtful presentation. So today, I will share some insights from our evaluation of two climate projects implemented in Burkina Faso under the Forest Investment Program. And we looked at how this project supported women access to climate finance and other benefits, and more importantly, how women were included or sometimes overlooked as key actors of change. Next slide, please. You can move to the next one. Okay, so the goal of our evaluation was to assess how women access funding and other benefits from the two FIP-supported projects. We share similar goals to support the local communities and to help people to better manage the natural resources, but these two projects used different strategies. It's important here to mention that both projects were implemented under the Forest Investment Program, but one of them was implemented under the dedicated grant mechanism. So for the rest of the slide, I will use the term FIP for the non-DGM project and the term DGM for the DGM project. So we looked at whether women were involved early enough in project design and how that affected gender outcomes. So our work was not just about who benefited, but how women participation influenced the way the project were built and delivered. Next slide, please. You can move to the next one. Yes. So about our methodology, for our evaluation, we used a mixed method approach, combining surveys with over 200 beneficiaries. Of them, we have 78% of women. We also conducted interviews with project manager and technical expert, program coordinators, and we also had focus group with some women groups. Our evaluation focused on 5 key questions, grouped under 3 main criteria. The first one is relevance. Were women included in project design, implementation, and monitoring? What barriers limited their participation? The second one will be on effectiveness. Here we want to know how the funds were used and how the implementation strategies influence women access to benefits. And we believe for this particular question that it will set the frame, the basis for the evaluation, for the comparative evaluation of the two projects, because key differences in implementation, design, or maybe in governance can lead to different outcome and impact. And this is what we want to assess. And the last one, the last criteria is impact. How did access to climate finance and benefits affect women income and decision-making power? So we follow the theory of change, and this helps us to capture both quantitative data like participation rates and also qualitative dimensions such as leadership, influence, and access to real economic opportunities. Before we move to the findings, the most important part, I have 2 clarifications. The first one is we did not treat gender as a separate issue. We just analyzed how it was integrated across governance, selection of beneficiaries, implementation process, access to the benefits of the project. And the second, while we focused on climate finance in our evaluation, we also considered benefits like training, equipment for income generating activities, infrastructures, community resource, and all of these has been supported by the project fund. You can move to the next slide, to the preliminary findings. So about the governance. In the FIP project, the governance was led by the municipalities. Women were consulted, but had limited influence on that. But in the GGM, the governance was community-led. Women were represented in the National Steering Committee, and there was a gender focal point in the team, in the implementation team of the project. About the beneficiaries selection, in the FIP, beneficiaries were identified through communal plans built after community consultation. And here, can note that the audience target was 30% of women. In the DGM, there was open calls to allow women group to submit their own project ideas, despite the challenges like literacy or administrative barriers. About the implementation process, the FIP followed a top-down planning model aligned with communal strategies, and the GGM followed a more flexible bottom-up approach, giving women's cooperative more room to lead and to innovate on their own projects. Can move to the next one. Gender mainstreaming. In the FIP, the gender was considered mainly during implementation through training, consultation, and different quota, like 30% quota for the consultation, but it was not embedded from the start of the project. And in the DGM, the gender was integrated from the design stage with 40% targets. There was a gender focal point on the team and sex disaggregated data collection. About the use of funds. So in the FIP, the funds were mostly used for communal assets like reforestation, training, or maybe some assets for local groups to perform income generating activities, and women benefited from that. In the DGM, we had women group that directly managed the fund for income generating activities. Sorry. Still, there was some challenge like low literacy and administrative complexity that limited their full financial autonomy. And then we move to the challenge encountered by women. And this cover both of the project. We had barriers like low literacy in the rural areas, lack of legal registration, security issues in our country, because we know that this is a real problem that cause some difficulties in mobility, and we have the limited control over resources even when everyone is involved. Can go to the last. So in short, our evaluation showed that when women are involved early, then bring strong leadership, innovation, and coordination skill that help projects succeed. But these strengths were not fully leveraged when gender was considered only later. And to truly make climate project gender sensitive, we need gender assessment at the design stage, clear gender sensitive indicators, and a way to track qualitative change, not just numbers. And these recommendations follow the CIF and the GEF guidance, which emphasize gender analysis, targeted actions, and proper monitoring from the start. I would also important to mention that our findings are still preliminary, as our evaluation is ongoing, but they already show how embedding gender from the beginning leads to stronger, more inclusive climate action. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Kate, Farah, and Aicha, for all your presentations. They were very insightful, and I'm sure they gave us a lot to reflect on as we move forward to the discussion segment. We'll have 2 rounds of questions, each lasting about 8 minutes. I will direct the questions to our speakers, but we also encourage everyone here in the audience to join this conversation using the chat. So please feel free to share your experiences and also try to answer these questions. We kindly ask you to indicate your institution, so maybe I can comment on a few of these answers in the end. And we will try to have a final moment to answer some questions from you, the audience. So if you could please share any additional questions you have here in the question and answers box in Zoom, please feel free to do so. So I will start with the first block, which is for us to discuss what are the key challenges in evaluating and monitoring the effectiveness of gender-sensitive actions. Have you learned any lessons on how to overcome them? And could you please share if you have? So let's start with our speakers. Maybe Kate can start. I will ask you to keep each about 2 or 3 minutes tops. Okay.
Sure. Okay. So in terms of challenges, I was thinking through what I think have been the learning that we've had or that I've had in terms of working on evaluating gender at the GEF. And I think one of the things that we work on is ensuring depth and substance in gender actions, sort of moving past a box ticking exercise. And we've also heard this in discussions within the GEF Gender Partnership. They've been very explicit because the partnership is made up of gender experts from different agencies. And so even with the high levels of compliance on the metric of attention to gender, we're just trying to think about, what does this actually mean in depth? Is attention adequate and tailored? Like, are the solutions that are presented in the project tailored to the local context, or is it just sort of like a general gender mainstreaming, like this is what you should do on gender in all practice or in all projects? Because that's not what the policy says. The policy says the gender action plan should be tailored to the local challenges that are identified in the analysis. And then I think, quotas were a really good example. I was recently working on a case study in Mexico where we heard that quotas are necessary but not sufficient. And so it's important to make sure that women are there in the room. Just simply having them there in a quota doesn't actually guarantee that they have a role in decision making or that there's any agency or empowerment vis-a-vis the projects. And then one thing that I've realized as I've worked at a climate fund after shifting from the World Bank is that some of this concept of gender being a tick box exercise is tied to the need to ensure buy-in for gender, like within your agency or within the people that you work with. So we're really lucky in the IEO that our leadership really supports gender and inclusion in our evaluation work. But the thing that we always have to do within the GEF is we always have to frame the gender and inclusion efforts in terms of achieving the environmental benefits, because the mission of the organization is generation of environmental benefits. And so, when you're talking to the environmental scientists, like that's why it's really important for us to build this body of evidence that links better environmental project outcomes with better gender inclusion. And then the other thing, and I'd like to hear from other people on it, but there's a lot of improvement that's needed when we talk about indicators. We need to avoid conflating participation with empowerment. And in general, I think I've seen a lack of robust indicators to measure gender inclusion. The last presentation touched on this. And I think, a lack of robust indicators prevents our ability to measure impact from the ex post evaluation perspective. It also prevents ability to provide for adaptive management during the project. And so I know at the GEF right now, there's a push for considerations related to gender-based violence, care and safety, sociocultural norms, but I think there's some work that needs to be done on that. So I'll stop there to give others time.
Thank you so much. Farah, would you also share?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, my comments would be very much aligned with what Kate just shared. There's a lack of robustness, there's a lack of depth, and we need to go beyond a tick boxing exercise. So I'll try not to repeat what she said, but very much agree with that. And I think our main challenge at CIF is the lack of mandatory requirements for gender reporting. So our main tool for capturing results at CIF is related to the female beneficiaries, and we are collecting this information through CIF's annual reporting. And there's only one indicator that is required to be disaggregated by sex, and it's the number of beneficiaries. So it's very challenging for us to obtain data beyond required indicators. And the project completion reports, they also often lack gender information. So we know that we operate in a space where there are significant gaps in gender disaggregated data. And this is due to a lack of capacity, a lack of time, a lack of resources. And so this is preventing us from assessing really the benefit and the cost of projects on women or vulnerable groups of people. You might be hearing my baby crying. I apologize for that. She was sleeping in the room next to my office. So just to continue, we know the importance of being intentional about integrating gender into all aspects of project cycle, and Aicha just highlighted this in her presentation. So for us at the CIF, ensuring proper monitoring mechanism in investment plan, it's been an ongoing and often an uphill battle. Because the past experience shows us that there's often good intention at the stage of design. This is where we come in and we look at the projects. With often we can see gender-specific analysis and dedicated activities, but without strong indicators that are mandatory for reporting, we simply don't know what happens with the projects. So this is why, we need strong analytical work and evaluation frameworks to build the awareness of the gender impact of interventions, but also to provide evidence of what works for promoting gender equality, women's leadership. There's an increasing focus on women's leadership at CIF and across the MDBs. So really a lot can be done when there's a greater understanding of the complexity. And so that means also going beyond simply capturing disaggregated data, but really addressing underlying issues of power dynamics, social norms. This can take us a long way, and we're still not there yet. And I think I'll stop there. Over.
Thank you so much, Farah. Aicha?
One of the biggest challenge we faced here was that gender wasn't embedded at the foundation of project design. And it was difficult for us without that baseline to track progress or understand the real impact on women's leadership or decision making or to access resources. Another key challenge was that numbers alone didn't tell the full story. Here, you just count the participant. It's not the same as capturing real empowerments. We needed better tools to track how women's voice and influence were evolving. And that kind of qualitative change takes time and intentionality. So if it's not set up from the beginning with gender or particular a gender sensitive indicators, it's difficult to track at the end of the project if progress has been made or not. And what we've learned here is clear. The gender assessment at the design stage isn't optional. It's here very essential. It will lay groundwork for relevant actions and meaningful monitoring. And we also need strong gender sensitive indicator, like I said, to go beyond outputs to capture real transformation. It's encouraging to see that now there are projects. And just to note that the project we are currently evaluating were closed maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And now there is a new project. It's scaling up a version of these projects, and it has integrated all the elements we are talking currently. It's more inclusive. It's a more inclusive models, and that's the kind of shift we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aicha. This actually connects to our next question. And I will also add another question that came from our audience. So I ask you now to please answer these two questions. So how have the monitoring and evaluation of gender-related aspects informed the design of subsequent projects and actions in both CIF and GEF? And the question from our audience, which I think it's very interesting, is what mechanisms help ensure that women's participation throughout the project cycle is meaningful and not merely symbolic? So maybe Farah can start now.
Thank you. So in terms of what has changed in recent years, I would say that now there is a better understanding that what gets measured gets done, basically. And so at CIF, gender equality and social inclusion dimensions are now incorporated into the investment criteria for CIF's new program and in our new integrated results framework. So we're trying to make it no longer just about quantitative data, but also ensuring that there is a better understanding of the need, especially when it comes to gender, to include qualitative indicators to track systemic level change. So we've also worked with our colleagues from the monitoring and reporting team to suggest specific co-benefits indicators that MDBs can adopt to track gender and social inclusion results beyond the scope of the project's primary objectives. And so what we can see also in the design of new programs that there is a growing understanding, a growing recognition of structural barriers that restricts women's participation in the public and in the private sectors. And so better acknowledgement and understanding of barriers such as time poverty, caregiving responsibilities, and also limited access to assets, leadership roles. But we still find that even if those structural barriers are increasingly acknowledged in diagnostics, the activities, they still tend to focus a bit less on interventions that would address those barriers. So this is also reflected on indicators. It's still today the case that some investment plans that include a focus, for instance, on job creation or on livelihood, would leave out indicators for leadership or asset control or norms. And it's a bit easy to understand the reason why. I mean, it's because those interventions are not immediately actionable, or even it's harder to measure impact. So it's more difficult than those related to employment. And so that could be the reason why we are focusing on other types of indicators, especially when we're dealing with constraints on time or on resources. So this is the reason why we're also encouraging teams to report on lesson learned on gender and consider, whenever it is feasible, in-depth studies on the gender impact of projects. And this is one way to capture not only results that were not tracked in the results framework, but that's also an opportunity to track unintended results. And so to the questions very quickly on the mechanism to ensure comprehensive, active, meaningful participation of women throughout project design, implementation, and reporting. We do also have guidelines on that. We've conducted several workshops with countries that were preparing investment plans, specifically sharing some best practices to make sure that women and women's organizations are properly identified. So that's mapping out those organizations very early, even before the project starts the design phase, try to understand the landscape and making sure that we address constraints and barriers that may prevent those women from attending consultations, but also addressing internal power dynamics during those consultations that may limit women's ability to meaningfully participate. And I'll stop there and happy to answer more questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Farah. Kate?
Thank you. So just very quickly on the use and influence of evidence. I think there's a lot of, again, we don't really work at the project level. So just sort of the examples I'm going to give are sort of more at the level of the GEF partnership, but there's a lot of examples of how our evaluations have driven changes in the way that the GEF, for example, changes their policy, hires dedicated staff for gender. We recommended that they do a gender action plan at the corporate level, and they did. We also made several recommendations in terms of increasing the attention and shift from just gender to also a broader social inclusion umbrella, and that's been taken on board in the GEF strategy in terms of a whole of society approach. Also thinking about encouraging the GEF to link the different policy requirements together, so making sure there's coherence between stakeholder engagement, gender, and safeguards, because they all speak to a lot of the similar issues. And then we've also recommended improvements in terms of monitoring the policy implementation. It's been a little bit slower in that regard. I mentioned that there's sort of qualitative stories on implementation of gender policy in the annual reports. We'd like to see more numbers and hard data, but I think this is a sort of an evolving discussion. It's always an unpopular recommendation to ask people to track more things, as the evaluators in the audience will know. And the GEF has also evolved its approach to tracking co-benefits. Just on the second question, I know we're out of time, but you know, from the evaluation perspective, examples of good indicators that we've seen are those that actually measure whether women are in decision-making roles or leadership roles in the project beyond just are they there. Measuring whether they have ownership or control of resources, if that's changed. Also, their ability to directly manage project funds or resources. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be gained from the GEF Small Grants Program, because that's a very inclusive, I guess, bottom-up or participatory program. So we have some examples, but I will leave it there to give time to Aicha.
Thank you. I will just maybe answer to the last question because I'm not native of GEF or the CIF. I think that one of the most important ways to make women's participation really meaningful is to ensure that they have real influence, not just a seat at the table or not just participation or consultation. We need to create space for women in decision-making bodies where they hold clear roles and voting powers. And this will allow, for example, when we have women fully included in project steering committees with the ability to shape priorities, to approve budget, to monitor progress, their voice actually shape the outcome. And this is an important point. The second one will be to provide tailored support to women, such as training, literacy assistance, or help with the administrative task. And this is something we saw in the project as a result, as our preliminary findings. Women's were the one with the greatest ideas of project, innovative ideas, but they lacked skills to build how to say that, project documents for project proposal to get the financing. So there was some consultant that was and they were helping women in building their proposal. And after we saw that even if their target was to have 40% of women beneficiaries, they reached more than 57%. So this is an important point. And yes, without this support, participation of women will be just symbolic. So we need leadership, real influence, and have tailored support for according their background and their specific needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, Farah, and Aicha, and also to our audience for participating in such a rich and thoughtful discussion. I am sure we have learned a lot today. And to close our session, I will now hand it over to Katie for the final remarks. So, Katie, please.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you for our great speakers. We'll be sharing with you the recording and presentations. Just to conclude, it is clear that conducting monitoring and evaluation with a focus on gender and climate is critical to ensure equitable, sustainable, and effective outcomes of development. And I have here at least 3 reasons for that. First is that climate and gender lens in evaluations helps us to better address inequalities. Gender-sensitive evaluations reveal how climate policies and programs impact different groups differently, and that knowledge is needed to be directed to inform a more tailored solutions to maximize impact. Second, our speakers have talked a lot about the importance of right indicators, qualitative research, data, and mainstreaming gender lens early on to inform climate programs. This is because the gender disaggregated data and evaluations on gender dynamics in climate action will help us to understand the intended and unintended impacts early on, and it will help us to make a more contextually relevant decisions and allocate resources accordingly. Last but not least, it's clear that gender and climate evaluations are important to inform systemic change. And evaluations can give a voice to women, as it's seen in Aicha's evaluation. It will also help us to identify and address structural inequalities and use that information to promote equity and sustainability. Today we end here, but we will continue unpacking gender and climate intersection in our next webinars, and we really appreciate all your insights, all your questions that we see in the chat box, and we will depend on this information to tailor and provide next rounds of webinars. Again, thank you very much for our great speakers, for our great moderator, and we're looking forward to meeting soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.